The rain beat down in relentless sheets against the towering glass facade of the Metropolitan Grand Hotel, each drop smearing across the vast panes like strokes of an unseen artist. Thunder cracked overhead, its rumble carried through the steel skeleton of the building, making the crystal chandeliers above the ballroom tremble. Inside, however, the storm was reduced to a distant symphony. The crystal ballroom glowed with warmth and wealth. Gilded mirrors reflected the glitter of diamonds, the sweep of silk gowns, and the careful smiles of New York's elite as they mingled beneath chandeliers heavy with light. Vincent Sterling stood near the polished mahogany bar, his posture straight, his gaze sharp, his tailored midnight blue tuxedo hugging the powerful lines of his frame. 32 years old, Forbes' darling, and master of an empire built from nothing more than his relentless will and a laptop in his 20s, he was the kind of man people stopped speaking when he entered the room. Yet tonight, his emerald eyes held no satisfaction, only calculation and fatigue. His glass of whiskey caught the light like amber fire, but the burn on his tongue failed to shake the restlessness that had stalked him for months. The gala around him was a blur of voices, politicians, charming donors, heiresses laughing a little too loudly, businessmen circling one another like predators dressed in tuxedos. Vincent nodded where necessary, shook hands when expected, but he felt apart from it all, as though pressed against the glass of his own life, staring in at a world he no longer recognized as his own. Success had delivered him skyscrapers, headlines, a reputation no one dared question. Yet, despite everything, a gnawing emptiness hollowed him out from within. Across the ballroom, Rosalie Chen slipped silently among the guests, a silver tray steady in her hands. Her simple black dress marsa kept her as one of the staff, one of many whose job it was to fade into the edges of the glittering crowd. Yet she carried herself with a quiet grace that set her apart, as if every movement, every turn of her wrist was deliberate. She balanced champagne flutes like a dancer carrying fragile secrets. Her long black hair was tied neatly back, exposing the soft curve of her neck. But her eyes, deep, thoughtful brown, were alive with something more than duty. To those she served, she was invisible. To herself, she was a witness. With every pass through the ballroom, she sketched mental portraits, the congressman with his forced laugh and sweating brow, the bored heiress tugging at her diamond necklace, the weary wife clinging to her husband's arm. Rosalie saw it all. The masks people wore, the delicate performance of wealth and status. Her fingers ached for a paintbrush, for canvas, to capture the contrast of glittering chandeliers against the storm raging beyond the glass walls. A shiver of lightning lit the ballroom in ghostly white, and for an instant the reflections in the mirrors seemed more real than the people themselves. Vincent glanced at his platinum watch, wondering how many more minutes of hollow conversation he had to endure before he could slip away. Rosalie dipped between a group of laughing donors, noting the way their diamond bracelets sparkled like tiny cages of light. Their world was untouchable, and she knew she didn't belong. Then it happened. The chandeliers above flickered once, twice, then went black. The orchestra faltered, cut short as the ballroom plunged into sudden, suffocating darkness. A ripple of gasps swept through the crowd, laughter sharp with nervous edges. In the pitch dark, the storm's voice claimed the room at last, thunder growling like a predator finally let inside. Vincent froze mid-step, his hand brushing cold marble as he tried to orient himself. He could hear the shuffle of expensive shoes, the clatter of glasses knocked off trays. Somewhere close, breaths quickened. Rosalie's heart hammered as she stood still, her tray pressed tight to her chest, listening, sensing bodies shifting blindly through the black. The power was gone, the storm pressing its claim, and in that breathless dark, two worlds were about to collide. The darkness was absolute, thick like velvet pressed over every sense. Gasps and murmurs swelled inside the ballroom as guests fumbled for their phones, some calling out names, others laughing nervously to hide the fear that crept in with the blackout. The storm outside thundered louder, rattling the glass walls of the hotel as if demanding entry. In that sudden blindness, people became shadows, and the glittering ballroom became a cave. Vincent Sterling moved forward carefully, his polished shoes tapping against the marble floor, the echo strangely amplified in the dark. His hand skimmed the wall until he felt air again, the opening to the east corridor where he was sure Catherine would be waiting. He wanted the conversation over with, wanted to escape her manipulative smile and her endless schemes. But the dark warped his sense of direction, and what should have been a simple walk stretched into a maze. The storm outside sent another flash of lightning across the glass walls, but it did not reach this corner. Here, he was blind. Rosalie Chen had just passed through the same area, balancing her tray of empty flutes, her steps soft and deliberate. She stopped when the lights died, her breath catching in her throat. Instinct told her to remain still, to listen. Around her, she heard the shuffle of gowns, the clinking of glass, the uneasy laughter of the rich. But closer, almost within reach, she heard another sound, the steady breath of someone moving toward her in the dark. Her pulse quickened. She stretched her free hand forward, unsure if she would meet furniture, a wall, or another body. Then it happened. A fur chest collided with her shoulder, a sudden warmth against her skin. Before she could apologize or step back, hands reached out, strong, steady, wrapping around her arms to keep her from stumbling. "Catherine," a deep voice whispered, rough with the edge of confusion. "I found you." Rosalie barely had time to draw in a breath before his lips brushed hers in the dark. The kiss was not cautious. It was a claiming, a mistake wrapped in fire. His mouth was warm, tasting faintly of whiskey and something darker, something restless. The world seemed to tilt around her, the ballroom fading into silence as though every guest had vanished. Rosalie's tray slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor, but she did not care. Her hands moved without thought, one pressed to the man's chest, feeling the strong, steady beat beneath his tuxedo. For Vincent, the moment was lightning. Catherine's kisses had always been calculated, rehearsed, shallow imitations of affection. This was different. This kiss reached straight through his polished armor, pulling at a part of him he had long buried. He held her closer, deepening the kiss, and for one impossible heartbeat he felt alive, more alive than he had in years. Rosalie's mind screamed that she should pull away. She was a stranger, a server, a nobody to men like him. Yet something inside her held still, surrendering to the raw tenderness in his touch. She tasted the storm, the desperation, the longing of a man who kissed as if he had been waiting his whole life for this single mistake. Then the lights flared back to life. Both of them jerked apart, blinking as the chandeliers reignited with golden brilliance. Around them the party resumed, laughter bubbling up now that the scare was over. Guests adjusted their gowns, men straightened their ties, and the performance of wealth continued as if nothing had happened. But for Vincent, everything had changed. The woman standing before him was not Catherine. She was younger, her dark hair tied back, her dress plain black, her lips still parted with shock. Her eyes were wide, luminous, not cold like Catherine's, but deep and vulnerable. His breath caught in his chest. He had kissed a stranger. Rosalie smoothed her dress with trembling hands, her cheeks flushed crimson. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the crowd, to retreat to the safety of invisibility. Yet she could feel his gaze anchored on her, heavy and unyielding. "You're not Catherine," Vincent said softly, almost to himself. "I'm sorry," Rosalie whispered, voice unsteady. "It was the blackout. I didn't see. I should go." She stepped back, but he leaned forward, eyes locked on hers with something fierce, something she had not expected from a man like him. "Don't apologize," he said, his voice low, rough with sincerity. "That was the most real thing I've felt in years." Rosalie's heart skipped, confusion tangling with fear. She turned quickly, retreating into the sea of servers who had already resumed their duties. Vincent stood still, watching her vanish into the glittering crowd, his chest heaving with something he could not name. For the first time in years, Vincent Sterling felt his world tilt, and it was all because of a stranger he had kissed in the dark. The city stretched out beneath Vincent Sterling's office window like a constellation brought down to earth. Towers of steel and glass pierced the night sky, their lights flickering in patterns he had once found comforting, reminders of the empire he had built with his own hands. But now those same lights mocked him. He had not slept properly in 3 days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. The stranger in the dark. The warmth of her lips. The shock in her eyes when the chandeliers blazed back to life. He had kissed thousands of women in his life, some publicly at galas, others privately behind closed doors, but none of them had left him like this. None of them had invaded his mind so completely that he could not focus on his board meetings or his contracts. His assistant, Margaret, had noticed his distraction. She reminded him twice to sign off on a merger agreement that normally would have held his complete attention. Instead, his pen hovered uselessly above the page, his mind filled with the memory of a soft voice whispering, "I should go." Vincent had ordered background checks, called the hotel, even demanded a list of staff from the catering company. Each time he had been stonewalled with polite refusals and privacy policies. His money opened almost every door in Manhattan, but this one remained locked, and the denial only sharpened his hunger. It was the first time in years that he could not simply command the outcome he wanted. For a man who had bent entire industries to his will, it was intolerable, and yet he could not walk away. Rosalie Chen, meanwhile, sat in her cramped Brooklyn studio, a canvas balanced on an easel before her. The rain had stopped, but the city outside her window still glistened with puddles, neon lights smearing across the wet streets. She lifted her brush, dipped it into midnight blue, and dragged the color across the canvas in restless strokes. She tried to paint the city skyline, but what emerged instead was a shadowed figure, faceless but strong, leaning close to a woman caught half in darkness, half in light. She dropped the brush with a frustrated sigh, her heart racing at the memory of the kiss she had not asked for and yet had not rejected. She had Googled him, of course. Vincent Sterling, billionaire CEO. His face on magazine covers, his life dissected in glossy features, the kind of man who dated women born with silver spoons, who vacationed in yachts that could buy entire city blocks, a man from a world she could never step into. And yet he had kissed her as if she were the only woman alive. She pressed her palms to her eyes, torn between shame and longing. In his tower office, Vincent leaned back in his chair and let the city blur before him. He replayed every second of that blackout moment, searching for clues. The scent of jasmine, the softness of her hands, her voice trembling with apology but carrying a quiet strength. He remembered the way she had disappeared into the crowd of black uniforms, swallowed by a sea of faces trained to be invisible. She was not Catherine, not one of the empty socialites who circled his world. She was something else, something real. The storm that had cut the lights was gone now, but inside Vincent the tempest had only grown. He could not banish her from his thoughts. He could not let go of the memory of that kiss. And in the silence of his office, as the clock ticked past midnight, he made a vow to himself. He would find her. No matter how many locked doors stood in his way, no matter how deep into the shadows she tried to vanish, he would bring her back into the light. But what Vincent did not know was that Rosalie had already made her own vow. She would stay hidden. She would bury the memory of that night beneath layers of work and paint and exhaustion, because men like Vincent Sterling destroyed women like her, even if they did not mean to. And no matter how her heart had skipped in the dark, she would not let herself be consumed. Two people, bound by one mistake, now moved in opposite directions across the sleepless city. The hunt had begun, though neither yet understood just how dangerous the game would become. Rosalie woke before dawn, the sound of a leaky pipe dripping steadily in her cramped Brooklyn studio pulling her from uneasy dreams. The air was damp and cool, carrying the faint smell of turpentine and stale coffee. She rolled from her thin mattress and sat before her easel, staring at the canvas she had abandoned the night before. A swirl of dark colors bled across it, storm shades layered with the outline of two figures who almost touched but remained trapped in shadow. She pressed her fingers against the rough texture of the paint as if by touch alone she could erase the memory that haunted her. Her brush trembled when she lifted it again. She told herself she would finish the commission piece due next week, a landscape of Central Park in spring, something cheerful and safe. Instead, her hand betrayed her, sketching again the shape of his jaw, the curve of his lips, the ghost of a kiss she had sworn she would forget. With a sharp cry, she flung the brush aside, the bristles leaving a streak of black across the floorboards. Rosalie's phone buzzed on the rickety table, a reminder for her morning shift at the cafe. She tied her hair back, pulled on her faded sweater, and forced herself out the door. The cold air slapped her awake as she hurried down the block. Yet even as she poured coffee for half-asleep commuters, her thoughts returned to him. The stranger who wasn't a stranger at all. Vincent Sterling. She had seen his face in articles, read about his billion-dollar deals, his ruthless reputation. That kind of man didn't notice women like her. But he had. And that single truth unsettled her more than anything. Across the city, in an office high above the skyline, Vincent leaned over a table covered with reports he had not read. His executives droned on about profits and projections, but their words blurred into static. He saw only her face, wide-eyed under the sudden glow of the returning chandeliers. He heard her voice whispering, "I should go." Every instinct told him to move on. Yet he could not. She had slipped past the walls he had spent his life building, and there was no closing them again. Margaret, his assistant, cleared her throat sharply, pulling him from his haze. "You haven't answered a single question in 10 minutes, she whispered under her breath. Vincent dismissed the board with a flick of his hand, ignoring their startled looks. When the room was empty, he leaned back, fingers pressed against his temples. He had sent investigators, called in favors, but Rosalie remained elusive. That made her even more dangerous to his peace. For once, money could not solve what his heart demanded. That night, Rosalie sat by her window, sketchbook open on her lap, watching neon spill across the rain-slicked street. She tried to convince herself that he would forget her, that men like Vincent Sterling did not chase ghosts. But she was wrong. Even now, his car was gliding through the city, black and sleek, his eyes searching the sidewalks as if he might catch a glimpse of her by chance. The storm that had united them was gone, yet its echo lingered, drawing them closer with every passing hour. Rosalie's vow to stay hidden and Vincent's vow to find her were on a collision course neither could avoid. And though she did not yet know it, the painting she had abandoned in frustration would soon become the key that tied their fates together. The coffee shop smelled of roasted beans and rain-soaked coats, a quiet refuge tucked into a corner of the city where no one expected to find billionaires or their restless ghosts. Rosalie stood behind the counter in her worn blue sweater, hair tied back loosely, apron dusted with flour from the muffins she had helped bake that morning. It was another shift to keep the rent barely paid, another disguise that let her move unnoticed through a city that rarely cared for those who struggled. She thought she was safe here, far from chandeliers and tuxedos, far from that kiss in the dark that haunted her every night. The bell above the dian, or chimed, and the world shifted. Vincent Sterling stepped inside, tall and commanding, his charcoal coat draped over his shoulders like a mantle of power. He didn't belong in this humble place of cracked tiles and chipped mugs, yet he moved with the certainty of a man who belonged anywhere he chose. Rosalie froze, the rag in her hand slipping from her fingers, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. Their eyes met across the crowded shop. He had searched for her for weeks, following whispers, calling in favors, piecing together fragments until at last he found the small cafe where she worked. Now that he stood before her, he felt the ground tilt beneath him. She was even more breathtaking in the simple light of morning, without gowns or chandeliers, without the shadow of wealth obscuring her. He moved forward slowly, as though she might vanish if he stepped too quickly. "Rosalie," he said softly, her name carrying across the room like a secret meant only for them. Her hands trembled as she reached for the counter. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "This isn't your world." Vincent shook his head, his gaze locked on her. "My world hasn't felt real for years. The only thing that has is you." The words cut through her like lightning. She wanted to deny them, to laugh at the absurdity of a man like him speaking to her as if she mattered. But she remembered the kiss, the way his arms had steadied her, the fire that had burned through her despite every reason to resist. A customer cleared his throat impatiently, shattering the fragile bubble between them. Rosalie forced herself to take an order, but Vincent did not move. He waited until the line thinned, then leaned across the counter, his voice low, urgent. Meet me tonight, just an hour. There's a coffee shop around the corner that closes late. Please, Rosalie, let me explain what that night meant to me. She wanted to refuse, to protect the fragile balance of her life, but when she looked into his eyes, she saw no arrogance, no cold calculation. She saw a man stripped bare by something he could not control. Against every instinct, she nodded. That night, the cafe on the corner was nearly empty. Vincent sat at a small table, his tie loosened, his jacket folded neatly beside him, 2 cups of coffee steaming between them. When Rosalie walked in, her heart stuttering, he rose at once and pulled out her chair with quiet courtesy. I don't know how to do this, she admitted, wrapping her hands around the warm mug as though it might shield her. We are too different. You are Vincent Sterling. I am nobody. He leaned forward, eyes fierce. You are not nobody. When I kissed you, I wasn't kissing a stranger. I was finding something I thought I had lost forever. I don't care about the difference between your world and mine. I only care about what I feel when I look at you. Rosalie's chest tightened, her resolve crumbling. The cafe around them blurred until there was only his voice, raw with truth, and the memory of that kiss that had set them both on fire. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to step into that dangerous light. But the sound of heels striking tile split the moment in two. A woman's voice, sharp and cold, carried through the room. So, this is where you've been hiding, Vincent? Rosalie turned, her blood running cold. Standing in the doorway was a tall blonde in a designer dress, her blue eyes glinting with malice. Catherine Wellington, the ex-fiancée. The storm they had both feared had just walked into the room. Catherine Wellington's heels echoed like gunshots across the quiet cafe floor. She stood tall, every inch of her sculpted elegance radiating disdain as her icy blue eyes swept over Rosalie. Her lips curved into a smile that was sharp and merciless, the kind of smile that cut deeper than any knife. Rosalie felt herself shrink beneath that gaze, a sudden reminder of the chasm that separated their worlds. So this is the reason you've been distracted, Vincent? Catherine's voice was smooth as glass and twice as cold. I never imagined it would be because of this. She flicked her gaze over Rosalie with deliberate cruelty, dismissing her simple sweater and worn shoes as though she were dirt tracked in from the street. Vincent rose from his chair in an instant, his jaw tight, his emerald eyes flashing with warning. Catherine, leave. But Catherine only laughed, the sound brittle and cutting, turning the heads of the few late-night customers. Leave? Oh, darling, you know me better than that. You and I have unfinished business. You think you can throw away an engagement like ours for some waitress who can barely afford her rent? Do you really believe she belongs in your world? Rosalie's breath caught in her chest. She wanted to run, to vanish before the floor beneath her gave way, but her feet would not move. Catherine's words pressed into the deepest fears she had tried to bury. She didn't belong. She never would. Vincent's voice came low, laced with steel. Our engagement ended months ago. It was never love, only convenience, and I refused to live by convenience any longer. For a heartbeat, silence thickened in the room. Catherine's smile faltered, then returned, even sharper. Convenience? How poetic. Tell me then, Vincent, what is love? Empty promises over cheap coffee? Do you really think she can walk beside you at your galas, in your boardrooms, on the covers of magazines? The city laughs at women like her. She will be nothing more than a scandal that ruins you both. Rosalie pushed back her chair, the legs scraping the tile with a harsh sound. Her throat tightened, but her voice came steady, even as her heart threatened to shatter. She's right, she whispered. This was a mistake. Our worlds are too different. Whatever happened that night, it can't mean more than a moment. Vincent reached for her hand, desperation flickering in his eyes. Rosalie, don't listen to her. That moment meant everything. Don't walk away from it. But she shook her head, stepping back beyond his reach. I have to go, please. Don't follow me. She fled the cafe, her chest burning with unshed tears, the night air biting at her skin as if to punish her for daring to hope. Behind her, Catherine stood with quiet triumph, her smile coiling with victory. Vincent turned on her, fury simmering like a storm barely restrained. "Stay away from her, Catherine. Stay away from me. Cross this line again, and I will dismantle everything you and your family cling to. Do not test me." Catherine only tilted her head, her smile unbroken. "We'll see, darling. We'll see." What Rosalie could not know as she disappeared into the shadows was that Catherine's threat would not end with cruel words in a cafe. Catherine had wealth, connections, and a ruthless hunger to win. And within days, Rosalie's fragile world would begin to collapse, piece by piece, as the true war for Vincent Sterling's heart began. Rosalie's world began to unravel with a precision that felt almost deliberate. At first it was small things, a gallery owner who had promised to display her work suddenly withdrawing the offer without explanation, an email she had been waiting on for a commission that never came. She told herself it was coincidence, the unpredictable cruelty of an art world that thrived on rejection. But when her landlord appeared at her door with a notice that the building had been sold and she had 30 days to vacate, her stomach sank with dread. The new buyer, he said, intended to gut the apartments and rebuild them into luxury condos. She sat in her studio late into the night, staring at her half-finished canvases stacked against the walls. Every painting told a piece of her story, each brushstroke, carrying her hope, her anger, her dreams. Now they looked like fragile soldiers lined up against a storm they could never withstand. She pressed her palms to her eyes, wondering how quickly a life could collapse. It was as though invisible hands were stripping her down to nothing. Those hands belonged to Catherine Wellington. In the shimmering world of Manhattan's elite, Catherine moved like a queen reclaiming her throne. She whispered in the ears of gallery directors, reminding them of debts owed to her family. She leaned on trustees and patrons, telling them in hushed tones that Rosalie Chen was unstable, unprofessional, unworthy of their investment. And with every whisper, another door closed for Rosalie. Vincent sensed it almost immediately. The city had taught him to recognize patterns, to follow the trail of manipulation. When his private investigator reported that Rosalie's landlord had ties to a shell company that traced back to Catherine, his blood turned cold. He knew her methods too well. She believed she could choke the life out of Rosalie's world until she had no choice but to vanish. Catherine thought Vincent would grow tired and return to her out of necessity, like a man crawling back to a gilded cage. She had gravely underestimated the man she once claimed to know. Vincent stood at the window of his penthouse, staring down at the city that had bowed to his will so many times. His empire had been built on ruthless strategy, his rivals crushed by his ability to strike before they even knew they were under attack. But this was different. This was not about acquisitions or profits. This was about a woman who had kissed him in the dark and set his carefully ordered world on fire. He made his choice in silence. Catherine wanted war. He would give her one. The next morning his offices buzzed with unusual energy. Teams were dispatched quietly to buy back the building Rosalie lived in. Shell companies were dismantled overnight. Gallery owners who had bowed to Catherine's pressure were suddenly offered deals so lucrative they could not refuse. Vincent orchestrated it all with a calm fury, each move calculated to dismantle Catherine's influence piece by piece. But Vincent was not content to fight only in the shadows. He requested a meeting with Catherine at her exclusive country club. She arrived in her tailored dress and pearls, confident and radiant, certain of her victory. But when Vincent leaned across the table, his voice low and sharp, she realized too late that she had provoked something she could not control. "You have 48 hours to undo every step you've taken against Rosalie," he said, his tone like steel. "If you don't, I will erase the Wellington name from this city. Your fortune, your family's standing, every alliance you cling to will crumble. I won't hesitate." Catherine's face paled, but her smile lingered, brittle and desperate. "You would ruin me for her?" Vincent's eyes burned with truth. "I would burn the entire world for her. Don't doubt me." Rosalie knew none of this yet. She only knew her life was collapsing. But the storm Vincent had unleashed on her behalf was already sweeping through Manhattan's high society, and soon, Catherine would learn that Vincent Sterling was no man to be tested. The Chelsea Gallery glowed with warm amber lights as Manhattan's art elite drifted from canvas to canvas, their voices a hum of praise and critique. Crystal glasses clinked, expensive perfume hung in the air, and beneath it all pulsed the tension of those desperate to be seen. Rosalie stood near the back, her black dress simple, her hair falling loosely around her shoulders. She felt out of place, a fragile shadow among glittering wolves. But tonight, one of her paintings hung on the wall. It should have been a triumph, yet she could barely breathe. Too many doors had slammed on her recently. Too many whispers followed her. It was as if invisible claws were tugging her back into obscurity. She turned to leave, the weight of failure heavy, when a ripple spread through the room. Conversations faltered, eyes shifted, and then she saw him. Vincent Sterling moved through the gallery with the presence of a storm cloaked in silk. His emerald eyes locked on her the moment he entered, and the crowd seemed to part instinctively, clearing his path. He wore no mask tonight, no boardroom armor, only determination carved into every line of his face. Rosalie's breath caught. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered when he reached her. "I should be exactly here," Vincent answered, his voice low but carrying a force that silenced the air between them. He gestured toward her painting on the wall, the one she had titled Blackout. It showed two figures suspended in shadow, their lips barely touching, with a surge of light breaking through behind them. "I bought this piece," he said, "and I hung it in my penthouse. Every morning I wake to it, and every night it reminds me of the only moment in my life that felt real." Rosalie shook her head, her throat tight. "That night was a mistake. Your world is dangerous, Vincent. Catherine made sure I learned that. She destroyed everything I worked for." Vincent's jaw clenched, his eyes dark with fury. "And I destroyed her. Every lie she spread, every scheme she built against you, I've torn it apart. The galleries she silenced are calling you again. The building that was stolen from you belongs to you now. She can never touch you again." Rosalie staggered back, shock trembling through her. "Why would you do that for me? You could have walked away." Vincent stepped closer, his voice rough, desperate, unguarded. "Because I cannot walk away from you. Rosalie, I have spent my life building walls around myself, convincing the world I needed nothing but power. But one kiss with you in the dark broke through everything I thought I was. Veilleux. I don't care about your world or mine. I care about us." The gallery had grown still, the crowd sensing the weight of the moment. Rosalie felt every eye on her, but all she saw was Vincent, standing before her, stripped of every shield. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box, opening it to reveal a ring that caught the light like captured fire. Gasps echoed around them as Vincent went down on one knee. "Marry me, Rosalie. Not because it makes sense on paper, not because it will please society, but because when I kissed you I found the only home I've ever wanted. Stand with me against them all." Her hands trembled as tears filled her eyes. She had dreamed of love, but never like this, never so dangerous, never so raw. The gallery lights blurred as she looked at him, a man willing to burn his empire for her. The silence stretched, every breath in the room waiting for her answer. Rosalie's lips parted, the word forming, when a new voice cut through the tension like glass breaking. "Interesting proposal, Vincent. But shouldn't she know you're still mine?" The crowd turned as Catherine Wellington strode into the gallery, her smile like poison, a folder clutched in her hand. The room erupted with whispers as Rosalie froze. Suspense shattered the fragile hope in the air. The war was not finished yet. Gasps rippled through the gallery as Catherine Wellington stepped into the light, her heels clicking against the polished floor like the countdown of a clock. The glittering crowd parted for her, whispers racing through the air, tension snapping in every direction. She carried herself like a queen reclaiming her throne, her silk dress clinging like armor, her blue eyes fixed on Vincent with a mix of rage and triumph. In her hand she held a folder, slim but deadly, and she raised it high enough for the nearest guests to see. Before you embarrass yourself further, Vincent, perhaps you should explain this. Her voice was clear, slicing through the silence. Our engagement may have ended in words, but not in law. This document proves it. Legally, you are still bound to me. A collective gasp rose, and Rosalie's stomach lurched as if the floor had dropped beneath her. She turned to Vincent, her face pale, her heart shattering. Is it true? She whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of scandal that surged through the room. Vincent's eyes locked on Catherine, emerald fire meeting icy blue. Slowly, deliberately, he rose to his full height, the ring box still in his hand, and faced the crowd. No, he said, his voice low but heavy with certainty. Our engagement ended months ago. Catherine is lying. Catherine's smile widened, venom lacing each syllable. Am I? Or are you rewriting history to seduce this little nobody? The world deserves to know who you really are, Vincent. A man who hides behind power and money but cannot even end a promise properly. Imagine the scandal when this hits the papers tomorrow. The gallery buzzed with frantic whispers, phones lifted discreetly to record the unfolding drama. Rosalie's chest tightened, her breath shallow, torn between fury, fear, and disbelief. She wanted to run, but her legs felt rooted in place. Then Vincent moved. He strode across the floor with a calm that was far more terrifying than anger. The crowd fell into hushed silence as he approached Catherine. He took the folder from her hand with a force that made her stumble, then held it up for all to see. You thought you could trap me with this? His voice carried across the gallery, firm and unyielding. I anticipated your move weeks ago. He opened the folder, pulling out a second document folded within. He handed it to the nearest gallery owner, a respected man whose word carried weight. Read it aloud, Vincent commanded. The man adjusted his glasses, scanning the PEP, quickly before his eyes widened. This is a signed dissolution agreement, he said. Catherine Wellington accepted a settlement 6 months ago. This proves their engagement ended legally. Gasps swept through the crowd again, sharper this time, cutting like knives. Catherine's face drained of color, her mask cracking as she realized the trap had closed around her. You forged it, she hissed, her voice shaking. Vincent stepped closer, his presence towering. No, you signed it yourself, Catherine. You thought you could bury the truth, twist the story, and use it as a weapon. But I don't play games I cannot win. And I warned you not to test me. The crowd turned, the whispers now poisoned with scorn for Catherine. Phones flashed, capturing her downfall in real time. Her power, her carefully polished reputation was crumbling before her eyes. Vincent turned then, his gaze softening only when it found Rosalie. The fury melted into something raw, vulnerable. He returned to where he had knelt moments before and lowered himself again, holding the ring as if nothing else in the world mattered. Rosalie, he said, his voice breaking with sincerity. I am not bound to anyone but you. You are the only truth in my life. I will fight every battle, face every enemy, burn every bridge if it means you will stand beside me. Say yes, not to my money, not to my world, but to me. Rosalie's eyes brimmed with tears. She had watched him strip Catherine's lies apart with ruthless clarity. Yet here he was, kneeling not as a CEO, but as a man stripped bare. Her heart pounded, the weight of every fear still pressing against her, but stronger than fear was the memory of a kiss in the dark that had awakened them both. Her lips parted, the word trembling on them, when thunder cracked outside, rattling the gallery windows as if the storm itself had returned to witness the choice she was about to make. The thunder rolled outside like the heartbeat of the city itself, a deep reminder that storms always return, no matter how many lights burn inside. Rosalie stood frozen in the gallery, every eye on her, every whisper a weight pressing into her chest. Vincent Sterling knelt before her, his hand steady, the ring gleaming like a promise of fire and light. He had stripped Catherine's lies bare for the world to see. Yet the fear inside Rosalie clawed at her, whispering that she did not belong, that this love was too fragile to survive the cruelty of his world. Her lips trembled, but her voice found strength. If I say yes, my life will never be mine again. I will be hunted, judged, mocked, and torn apart. Tears spilled over her cheeks. Are you certain you can protect me from that? Vincent looked up at her, his emerald eyes unwavering, his voice rough with truth. I cannot protect you from everything, Rosalie. But I can promise this. I will stand in front of you every time the world tries to break you. I will fight until my last breath. And I will never, ever let you stand alone. The crowd hushed. Even those who had come only for the art now leaned forward, captivated by a drama that no canvas could capture. Catherine, broken and trembling at the edges of the room, realized her reign of control had ended. She turned to leave, her exit as sharp and brittle as shattered glass, but no one followed her. All eyes remained on Vincent and Rosalie. Rosalie looked at him, her heart torn open, her fears and her hopes colliding in a single moment that seemed to last forever. She thought of the blackout, the kiss that should never have happened but changed everything. She thought of the night she had painted until her fingers bled, the loneliness of her tiny studio, the whispered voice that told her she would always remain invisible. And then she thought of him, the man who had found her in the dark and seen her not as a servant, not as a shadow, but as something real, something irreplaceable. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. Then louder, strong enough for the gallery, strong enough for herself. Yes, Vincent Sterling, I will marry you. The gallery erupted with applause, cheers echoing beneath the chandeliers. Vincent rose in one fluid motion, sweeping her into his arms and kissing her deeply, without hesitation, without fear. The kiss was different from the first in the blackout. This one was alive with certainty, with promise, with the knowledge that whatever storm waited outside, they would face it together. 6 months later, the vineyards of Napa Valley glowed golden under the setting sun. Their wedding was small, intimate, surrounded only by those who believed in love beyond status and wealth. Rosalie wore a dress she had designed herself, each stitch a piece of her story. Vincent's vows brought tears to every eye as he spoke of light found in darkness, of walls torn down for love. They danced beneath strings of lights that shimmered like stars, the air filled with laughter, music, and the scent of blooming vines. During the reception, Rosalie unveiled her newest painting. It showed 2 figures kissing in shadow, their outlines illuminated by a sudden burst of light, a moment captured forever. She titled it, The Blackout Kiss. The guests stood in awe, but Vincent only held her hand tighter, whispering in her ear, "Thank you for teaching me that even in the darkest moments, love can be the light." Rosalie smiled through tears, resting her head against his chest. "And thank you for finding me when no one else could see me." Their story became legend in New York, whispered not for its wealth or its glamour, but for the truth it carried. That love found in darkness could survive the fiercest storms. That sometimes the most powerful empires were not built of steel and glass, but of 2 hearts choosing each other, again and again. And whenever their children asked how they had met, Vincent and Rosalie always told them the same thing with a smile. The best things in life happen when the lights go out and the heart learns to see in the dark.